What is up, everybody? This is Paul here, and this is the second video in my wireless microphones for DJ series. And in this video, I want to talk about steps you can do to improve the wireless system you have and make sure that you're optimizing your system so that you have the best performance and you have the least number of problems and dropouts. So thanks for watching and hope you enjoy. I want to start out by first talking about things that can actually affect the performance of your wireless system, and in particular, things that can affect the performance of your wireless system in a negative way. So any objects that kind of get in the line of sight are going to cause issues. So especially metal objects, because metal has this weird way of blocking EM or radio waves. Also concrete, big concrete walls. Think about any place that you're going to have issues getting Wi-Fi. It's kind of a similar idea of sending a radio wave, although it might be the case that you don't get Wi-Fi because the cell tower is, miles and miles away and having to shoot through something, and you're getting good performance. So perhaps the most important thing is try to get line of sight between your receiver and transmitter, which means that if you were like sitting where your transmitter is and you look, you can actually see your receiver as opposed to like there being bodies or something in the way. In fact, one really interesting story is I used to put my receivers on top of my ceremony speaker for wedding ceremonies, and I used to get good performance out of a pretty cheap microphone. And then what I did is I sort of upgraded my system where I put my microphones inside a rack case that then sat on a folding table for ceremonies. And then I started getting all these issues with interference. And the reason is because instead of this receiver being 6 feet off the ground, it was now 3 feet off the ground. And in a wedding ceremony, that can be the difference between line of sight from the receiver to the officiant and from the receiver through a bunch of people sitting down in the first row or something and the officiant. So we'll talk a little bit more about placement of the receiver a little bit later, but of course line of sight is super important, and that's something you're going to try to get in all cases. So try not to block the spectrum. And this should go without saying. I mean, EM waves this is the same waves as like light and color. So just like if you were to have a light source and you were to put a sheet or some sort of object, metal or wood or something in front of it, it would be harder to see the light. This is the same exact thing that's going on with your system. So line of sight is super important. Also, reflections from floors and walls and the ceiling and people, kind of in a similar idea that you can have anything in the way can cause issues. Also, anything that your signal can bounce off of can also cause issues. And this is why it's generally easier to get better performance outside in a big open field than it is inside, where you have walls and things where the signal can bounce off and you can end up getting cancellations. Just like if you're using a big subwoofer and you're getting all these low frequencies that sound great outside, and then you're inside and certain low frequencies can disappear because of the way that the sound is interacting with the walls of the room. It's kind of the same idea here. You can have these issues that will affect your microphone performance because sound is a wave and light is a wave, and in some cases they end up behaving similar. Another things that can affect performance are sort of TV stations that are broadcasting nearby, and this can cause both interference and noise. And it probably won't be the case that you'll be able to hear what a TV station is saying, but it will cause issues where we saw before where your received signal's quality will go down because it's harder for the receiver to sort of untangle the signal that you're sending and this sort of TV station. So that's where you can get a lot of interference and a lot of noise and can be really dropouts. And the way to sort of avoid this is be sure to give your microphone a fresh signal scan as much as possible, and try not to be operating in any places where the TV frequency ranges are. And there are ways you can go online and see which frequencies the TV stations are broadcasting in your area. That way you can choose a frequency that is not being occupied by these TV stations, or at least is less likely to be occupied. Another issue, and you'll see this before other DJs in the next room or in another room. I've been at venues where there's, let's say, 2 buildings that are separated by 5,000 feet or something like that, and there will still be issues with dropouts because the other DJ might be using the microphone at the same frequency. So these are possibilities. Now, 5,000 feet is probably pretty extreme, but let's say it's 1,000 feet or a couple hundred feet between 2 rooms. And those are 2 different buildings. I mean, think if you're in a hotel ballroom and there's a wedding reception in the ballroom next door. These can cause tremendous issues, and you can even end up picking up the signal that someone is sending, and you're hearing something completely different because it's demodulating a signal. It's really important to not be getting any of this interference because these are what causes these issues. And once again, you always want to perform a frequency scan at a new venue. It should be like the first thing you do when you get there and you set up everything. And in fact, DJ Dave even recommends doing it before toasts. You got everyone sitting down. Now, like because of the people in the room, it's changed sort of the layout and where waves can be, it's sometimes worth just doing a frequency scan there, especially if it's really easy. So, doing it right before the ceremony starts, doing it right before toasts, anytime there's going to be some large block of speaking. You don't have to be super OCD about it, but, any sort of critical moment where you don't want there to be dropouts, it's sometimes worth, if you have the mics there, just do a scan. What else? Of course, another thing that's going to affect performance is distance. And just like our sound analogy, standing 50 or 100 feet away from a speaker is going to be a lot quieter than standing 5 feet away. And in the same way, standing 100 feet away from a receiver to a transmitter as 5 feet. So you want to get as close as possible. And we'll talk about some interesting ways and strategies you can get closer without kind of being in the way a little bit later. Now, another thing you can do is you can boost your radio frequency power to accommodate. And a lot of sort of the upper level wireless microphones will actually allow you to set the power of your transmitter so that it can sort of overcome these losses and distances. So this can also sometimes help with interference, but I find in general this basically can help with distance. So if you know you're going to be transmitting 200 feet and you know the setup, maybe it's worth boosting your RF power on your transmitter to sort of accommodate for this distance. Now, you don't want to boost too much because you can actually end up getting what's called RF or radio frequency overload. And this was actually an issue that I had in a setting where I was doing corporate AV and we were setting up. And we had these, these Shure microphones just kind of running into all these issues because of all this interference. So we were using paddle antennas at the time, the big antennas that you put on, microphone stand or something. And those had a gain, and we were able to pump up the gain on the paddle antennas, and we were still having all these issues. So we called Shure in the middle of this event, and we were like, this is luckily before the event started, this is in the middle of us setting up, and we were kind of telling them like, hey, you know what, like we've tried doing all these scans, we've tried doing everything, what's going on? And it ended up being the case that we were actually overloading the radio frequency in the room, and it was causing what's called multipath interference, which basically means, let's say here's the receive signal, let's say this is the transmitter and this is the receiver. The transmitter is sending a signal, but what the receiver is also getting is a reflected wave off the ground, and these can actually destructively interfere and cause this to receive basically next to nothing. So in that case, the solution was actually to decrease the RF power. So once again, it's going to depend on the room you're in. It's going to depend on a lot of factors. Sometimes boosting the signal can help. Sometimes boosting it too much can make things worse. So that's why it's always important to get there early, do a check, walk around the room. If you know where people are going to be talking or where people are going to be giving toasts, if it's a wedding or things like, or where the MC is going to be if you're at a club or something, it's worth going there and, testing it out in that case, because it might be the case that there's a specific dead zone there, or you need to boost or cut just because that's kind of the area that you are in. So let's say you have a microphone system. What are some ways we can do to improve the performance of your system and, just kind of get a better sounding system that's more reliable without having to spend any money on a new system? First thing is always do a frequency scan, as we talked about before. You want to minimize interference. You want to minimize sort of any noise in the channel. And the best way to do that is doing a frequency scan, because what your microphone is going to do is it's going to look generally for the best carrier frequency if you let it scan. And this is a big issue that I know a lot of DJs run into. They think just throwing $2,000 at a mic, as opposed to, let's say, a $500 mic, is going to give them increased performance. And sometimes actually spending more on a mic is going to get you a microphone that may actually perform worse without a frequency scan, because when you're spending $2,000 on a microphone, the people who are making the mic are going to assume you know what you're doing because you're spending $2,000. So it's important, always do a frequency scan. It doesn't matter if you're using a $200 mic or $2,000 mic. Basically, this interference is completely independent of the quality of the mic itself. And while, let's say a more expensive mic might have better components and may be able to overcome some noise and some interference better than another, there's nothing that you can do to overcome interference. It's not like buying $2,000 microphone is going to shut down all the TV stations nearby and that's what's going to cause you to get a better signal. So don't think that buying a better microphone is going to alleviate the need to do a frequency scan. You should always be doing a frequency scan, at least when you get there to the venue, just to sort of minimize the interference. Another thing you can do is get this cheap little, basically what it is, it's a handheld spectrum analyzer called RF Explorer, and you can use it to actually see what's going on. So this is kind of a picture of what RF Explorer looks like. You can find it for about $200, and it'll actually show you you can set it to the lower and higher ranges of your microphone, and you can see kind of where the noise and where the interferences are. And here, you can see this peak. This could be from another microphone system, let's say from a DJ nearby. It could also be from a radio station. So if your microphone when you arrive at site is tuned to this frequency, you're going to wonder why your microphone is so bad or why you're getting so many dropouts, and it's because you're competing with something else that's transmitting at the same frequency. So what this can do is you can see the entire spectrum, and then you can say, hey, you know what? If my microphone allows me to transmit at 650 megahertz, maybe I'll just set it manually to my transmitter and receiver to 650 megahertz, and then you're less likely to have issues. And by doing this, then you turn your system on, you'll actually see the peak as a result of the carrier frequency and the signal you're sending. So pretty cool. It can show you where the noise floor is and any open frequencies. A great investment, and it's USB rechargeable, and it fits into your hand, and it's a great piece of kit to have. The next thing you want to do is get your receiver and transmitter as close as you possibly can, and you want to try to get line of sight. Another thing, if you're using quarter wave or half wave antennas, you want to point them like a V with 90 degrees between them, and you want to have it like a V up in the air. And if you're not sure what sort of antennas that your system is using, just consult the manual or Google it, because certain systems will have quarter wave or half wave antennas, and the easiest thing to do is point them like a V. If you're using paddle antennas, different paddle antennas have different sort of responses, so there's not really too much of a guideline there. But of course, half wave and quarter wave antennas, point them like a V, because those are going to help you get a more reliable receive signal, due to the fact that most of these receivers operate on what's called true diversity. And of course, try to get line of sight and try to get your receivers up high as well, because getting up high is going to help you get line of sight, because if people are, let's say, 6 feet tall, maybe a little bit less on average, and your receiver is 6 or 7 feet up in the air, then you're going to get much better performance by getting them higher than not. So for ceremonies, I can actually put mine on top of my speakers. For ceremonies, I use a JBL Eon 1 Compact and a Sennheiser EW500 system, and I just put my battery-powered receivers on top of my JBL Eon 1 Compact, and then I can just wirelessly control the volume of the microphones with the app, sitting somewhere else. And, of course, I like to be right next to the speaker, but that's an option as well, where you get line of sight and you don't have to sacrifice anything, or don't have to make wiring any more annoying than it could be, because there's basically no wires to a mixer. Another thing that's important too, check your batteries. Fresh batteries can often mean a higher power signal, because if your transmitter is using AA batteries and you're kind of working on 1 bar out of, let's say, 3 or 4 on your mic system, you're going to have less radio frequency power as you're getting near the end of your battery's life, or if your battery's older than a fresh battery. So sometimes putting in fresh batteries is a good idea. And I know DJs, as soon as every new event, they'll just put in new batteries. Or if they're using rechargeable batteries, they'll recharge them before every event. Or they'll do it as soon as they see it down to, 3 bars as opposed to 4. So sometimes, it can just be an issue of fresh batteries. And this is something you will notice. Like, I've been in the middle of an event, I've noticed the battery's low, I'll change them out, and now all of a sudden any of the issues I was having can be completely gone. So this is a non-trivial solution, is just changing out the batteries. And sometimes you just got to pray, because there's so much that can happen and so much that's outside of your control, that you can do everything right and you can have the best system possible, and just because of the circumstances, or because your microphone system operates in a specific frequency range that just happened to be busy that day, or happy to be busy in the area that you're working in, and there's not really much you can do about that, it just sucks, and you want to do the best you can. And sometimes in those cases, it's good to have a backup, or good to have a wired mic for backup, just in case you end up in any dropouts. So you can do the best you can, but of course, at the end of the day, there's still so much that can happen. Wireless is a fickle beast. What else can you do? So now is what I want to talk about, is give an example of an actual, sort of case study. So this is sort of a wedding ceremony, and here's, the groom's family, the bride's family, and here's where sort of the officiant would be, the pastor and the bride and groom. And of course, the question is now, where would I want to set up my receiver and my sort of DJ table for the ceremony so that I get the best performance? Now, perhaps the easiest thing to do would be to set up right next to the bride and groom, kind of up here. Now, the problem is you kind of end up with a real life issue where you don't want to be up in front. You don't want to be in all these pictures. It doesn't look very professional. So maybe that's not the best place to be. So how about in the back corner? Now you're really out of sight. The problem with this here is if your receivers are at about 3 feet off the ground on a folding table, you're going to be shooting through all these people to get to the officiant. So that's kind of a problem in and of itself. Plus, you're maximizing the distance between the officiant and the DJ. Furthermore, if you have a speaker here that's pointed here, you're actually having the microphone in the line of sight of your speaker, which means you're going to have a chance that you're going to be picking up feedback. So in a scenario like this, and of course some of this is going to depend on where the power is in the room and all these sorts of things, I actually think the best place to set up is right here on the side. Because not only can your speaker sort of cover this without necessarily getting the officiant in the line of sight, but you're also not in necessarily any pictures, and you're closer to the receiver without being an eyesore. If you think about what's going on here, maybe this is your speaker, and you can turn it in such a way that your officiant is not in the direct line of sight of the speaker, so you're minimizing your chance at getting any sort of feedback. And also, if your officiant, you know he's going to be standing here, and you know you're going to be setting up here, put it in his right pocket. That way you're not shooting through his body to get to the receiver. You kind of got to think, if I'm setting up over here, and the officiant's going to be standing here facing the audience, which pocket should I put the transmitter in, or which side of his belt should I put the transmitter in order to get the best line of sight and not have to be shooting through, a human being. All right, that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. And in the next video, I want to talk about things to look for if you're considering buying a new system, a new wireless mic system, and also some common questions and common misconceptions about wireless systems that I want to clear up that some people have asked. So see you then. Thanks for watching.